The UAP Harold Case File 010 report the above for what it may be worth. It is a little before dawn on the 27th of January, 1994. 41,000 feet over the desert of Kazakhstan. In the dark, a Boeing 747 is cruising east. On the flight deck sit 3 American pilots, professionals, careermen, the kind who have logged tens of thousands of hours and seen very nearly everything the sky can do. And then the sky does something they cannot explain. A light comes up over the eastern horizon. A light, in their own words, of enormous intensity, moving fast and far higher than they are. For the next 40 minutes, they watch it climb and dive and cut 90-degree corners, loop in circles and corkscrews at speeds and forces no aircraft they know could survive. The captain takes out a pocket camera and shoots what he can, and when the sun finally comes up, the airplane flies underneath a set of contrails hanging impossibly high. Contrails whose looping path, they swear, traces the exact maneuvers of the thing that left them. 2 days later, they walk into the American embassy and tell the story. The embassy writes it down, encrypts it, and fires it off to Washington, to the Secretary of State, to the CIA, to the Defense Intelligence Agency, and to 6 embassies across half of Asia. And at the very bottom, the embassy adds 1 sentence of cover, a sentence so perfectly diplomatic it became the name of this episode. Tonight, a real State Department cable, released in full, that has sat in the government's files for 30 years. Who these men were, what they saw, and the one small, careful line the United States government attached to all of it. Quote, "We have no opinion, and report the above for what it may be worth. Start, as we always do, with the object in your hand. Because here, the document is the story, and the document is not a photograph and not a witness on camera. It is 3 pages of paper. A diplomatic cable, a State Department cable, is the nervous system of American foreign policy. The message traffic that runs between Washington and its embassies around the clock. Rigid format, a header block of routing codes, numbered paragraphs, a signature, an end mark, and, crucially, it is contemporaneous, not a memoir written years later, but the report filed within 72 hours, while the memory was fresh and before anyone had a story to sell. Look at the header, the message reference number,
94 Dushanbe 259.
94 for the year. Dushanbe, the capital of Tajikistan, where the embassy sits. 259, the cable's serial number. It was transmitted at 2:58 in the morning, Zulu time, on the 31st of January 1994. The subject line states the entire case in 7 flat teleprinter words.
Tajik Air pilots report unidentified flying object.
Now, the single most important word on the page, and it is a word about the absence of secrecy. The classification.
Unclassed Dushanbe 00259.
Unclassified, not secret, not even limited official use. The embassy could have wrapped this report in any level of protection it wanted, and it chose the lowest there is. From the moment it left Dushanbe, this UFO report rode in the routine, unclassified stream, readable by any state officer with ordinary access that week. The government was not hiding this, it was filing it in the open. And look at who it was filed to, because the distribution list is half the story. The action addressee is the Secretary of State, but copies went directly to these.
CIA, Washington. DIA, Washington. American Embassy, Moscow. Tashkent, Ashgabat, Almaty, Beijing, Bishkek.
Feel the weight of that. The CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the entire ring of American embassies around the event, Moscow and every Central Asian capital in the neighborhood, Tashkent, Ashgabat, Almaty in Kazakhstan itself, Bishkek, plus Beijing. A single UFO report from 3 pilots was staffed within 4 days to both intelligence agencies and 7 embassies spanning a third of the planet. Whatever the embassy said about having no opinion, the routing says the opposite. It is signed with one surname, Escudero, the senior embassy officer of record, and closed with the teleprinter sign-off and the notation, archive copy. And here is the chain of custody, because provenance is the whole credibility of the thing. This document did not fall out of the sky in 2026. Its journey into daylight has 3 stops.
February 2000. The cable is first released to the public in a Freedom of Information packet from the Computer UFO Network, 22 State Department cables spanning 1973 to 1994, February 25, 2026. Har Menant clears it, quote, released in full, over the name of Acting Director John Powers. May 8, 2026, the Department of War posts it, with 161 other files on its public UAP portal under the program it calls Pursue.
3 separate daylight events, more than a quarter century apart, and the text matches across all of them. Not a leak, not a rumor, not a photocopy of a photocopy, a genuine United States government record published by the government itself that you can pull down from a .gov address tonight. The only question left is the one this episode turns on. What does it say, and how much of it can we stand behind? To weigh what these men saw, you first have to know who they were and why they were there, because that, it turns out, is the most quietly astonishing part of the entire file. The cable names the principal witness plainly, no redaction, right in the header tag and the first paragraph.
Tajik Air Chief Pilot, American citizen Ed Rhodes, and his 2 American pilot colleagues.
Captain Ed Rhodes, an American citizen, the chief pilot of Tajik Air, the national airline of Tajikistan, a country that in January 1994 was barely 2 years old, a raw fragment of a collapsed Soviet Union in the middle of a civil war. And with him, 2 more American pilots, 3 United States citizens on the flight deck of the flag carrier of a post-Soviet republic in Central Asia. Your first honest reaction should be, that does not add up. What are 3 American airline captains doing, flying a 747 for Tajikistan, of all places, in the dead of a Central Asian winter? The cable answers half of it in a single phrase. These men, it says, were veterans of one specific airline, and here I am quoting the document, of their years.
Flying passenger aircraft for Pan Am.
Pan American World Airways, Pan Am, for half a century the most glamorous name in aviation, the airline of the jet age, had collapsed into bankruptcy in December 1991. It put thousands of the most experienced pilots in the world out on the street overnight. And here is where our own file goes quiet and the independent record picks the story up and confirms it in a way that is honestly better than fiction, because the airplane itself has a documented history and it explains everything.
For a few short months across the winter of 1993 into 94, Tajik Air ran a Boeing 747 SP on a long-haul route between London and Dushanbe. The aircraft was a former Pan Am and United Jumbo, leased in from United Airlines, registration November 149, Uniform Alpha, and it was flown by Pan Am flight crews. The service lasted roughly from December 1993 to February 1994.
Sit with how neatly that locks together. A tiny, war-torn republic wants a prestige international route, so it leases a second-hand jumbo and hires the one labor pool on Earth, flush with elite, unemployed wide-body captains the pilots Pan Am had just dumped. That is why 3 American ex-Pan Am aviators were on the flight deck of a Tajik Air 747, and the sighting, the 27th of January 1994, falls dead center inside that narrow 3-month window when the airplane and the crew existed at all. The independent aviation record, which knows nothing about any UFO, quietly corroborates the exact improbable scaffolding of our cable: the airline, the aircraft, the Pan Am cruise, the date. When the boring, checkable facts of a strange story all check out, you are obliged to take the strange part more seriously, not because it proves anything, but because the witnesses are exactly who and where and when the document says. And these are not teenagers with a phone. They are 3 professional airmen who spent careers at the controls of heavy jets, at altitude, at night, watching the sky for a living. When men like that tell you they saw something they could not explain and refuse the easy answer, it is still testimony, still human memory, but testimony from the top of the profession. So here is the encounter in the cable's own sequence. Paragraph 1, after the introductions, drops you straight into it. Position first.
747 SP at latitude 45 north and longitude 55 east over Kazakhstan. They first encountered the object as a bright light of enormous intensity, approaching them from over the horizon to the east at a great rate of speed and at a much higher altitude than their own.
Fix that geometry because it matters later. The airplane is at 45 north, 55 east, over west-central Kazakhstan. The object comes up over the horizon from the east, from deeper inside Kazakhstan, fast, and well above the 747's own 41,000 feet. A bright light of enormous intensity. Not a shape yet, a light. And then it does not pass, and it does not fall. It stays, and it performs.
They watched the object for some 40 minutes as it maneuvered in circles, corkscrews, and made 90-degree turns at rapid rates of speed and under very high Gs.
40 continuous minutes of observation from a moving flight deck. And in that time, the object does the vocabulary that makes this case matter. Circles, corkscrews, 90-degree turns, very high Gs. Hold on to those words, because in a later act, you will hear a United States Navy commander use almost exactly the same list to describe something over the Pacific in 2004. Here they are already in State Department teletype in 1994. The captain does what a professional does. He reaches for a camera.
Captain Rhodes took several photos with a pocket Olympus camera and will send copies to the embassy and the Tajikistan desk, Lowry Taylor, in the department if they come out.
A pocket Olympus camera. This is 1994 film, not pixels. You shoot and you pray the exposure was right. Note the hedge in the government's own prose, if they come out. He even names the desk officer in Washington who is to receive the copies, Lowry Taylor, on the Tajikistan desk. And this is one of the aching holes in the file, so be honest about it now. Those photographs never surfaced, not attached to the cable, not in the 2026 release. The single piece of physical evidence this case might have produced is, as far as the public record shows, simply gone. Then the exit, as clean as the entrance.
After some time, the object adopted a horizontal high-speed course and disappeared over the horizon.
And paragraph 2 gives the only physical description the crew could honestly offer. Watch how carefully they qualify it.
As it was dark when the object was observed, the crew were unable to discern its shape. They described the light it emitted as having a bow wave and as resembling a high-speed photo of a bullet in flight, in which a very small object gives off a much larger trailing wave of heat and light.
Stop there because it is the most telling sentence in the account. They could not see a shape. It was dark. They will not claim a saucer, a cigar, windows, or wings. They saw a light, a restraint most UFO witnesses never manage, and the image they reach for is a photographer's image, a high-speed photo of a bullet in flight, a tiny object throwing off a much larger trailing wave of heat and light, a bow wave. That is not stock UFO language. It is a specific technical comparison chosen by men who spend their spare time behind a lens, reaching for the one picture in memory that matched what they saw. And it is where the light ends and the physics begins. Everything so far is testimony. What the eye saw, what the memory held. But paragraph 2 does something a UFO report almost never does. It hands you a claim you could, in principle, have tested. It leaves the sky and touches the physical world. It talks about contrails. 45 minutes after the first sighting, the sun is coming up, and the airplane flies underneath something.
Some 45 minutes after the initial sighting, as the sun was rising, the aircraft flew under the contrails which the object had left behind. The plane was making over 500 knots.
The object is gone, but the crew says it left a track. Vapor trails hanging in the high air, and now, in daylight, their own 747, doing better than 500 knots, passes beneath them. And then Rhodes makes the single most falsifiable statement in the document.
Rhodes estimated the altitude of the contrails at approximately 100,000 feet. Noting that there is too little air and moisture at that extreme altitude to enable the creation of contrails by the propulsion mechanisms of ordinary aircraft, which might be able to reach that height.
100,000 feet, nearly 19 miles up, more than double his own jumbo jet, far above where any airliner of the era could fly. And he attaches a physical argument. At that height, there is too little moisture for an ordinary engine to make a contrail at all. Is he right about the physics? Here, the independent record backs the pilot up, and it matters in both directions.
Contrails form when hot, humid engine exhaust meets air cold and moist enough for the vapor to freeze. In practice, that happens in a narrow band of the upper troposphere, roughly 28 to 42,000 feet. Climb into the stratosphere and the air is far too dry. At 100,000 feet, there is essentially no moisture to work with. Ordinary jet contrails simply do not form up there.
So Rhodes's physics is sound, which sharpens the puzzle to a point and cuts, as honest evidence always does, both ways at once. If nothing ordinary can make a contrail at 100,000 feet, then either something not ordinary made those trails, or the altitude estimate is wrong and they were far lower than he thought. Keep both blades in your hand. We return to them in the skeptic's corner, and we will not pretend the second away. But first, the beating heart of this cable. The one line that separates it from 1,000 lights in the sky reports. Rhodes does not just describe the trails, he describes their shape.
The paths of the contrails reflected the maneuvers of the object, that is, circles, corkscrews, and so on.
The circles, the corkscrews, written across the dawn sky in vapor, in daylight, 45 minutes after the light was gone. If the crew saw what they say, here is the tissue connecting the vision to the world. The object carved loops and corkscrews in the dark, and at sunrise, the sky still held them. Testimony tied to a physical record that outlived the event. But be genuinely careful. This is still the crew's account of what the trails looked like. Not a photograph, not a radar plot. No instrument in this file measured those contrails, timed them, or fixed their altitude. It is 4 eyes and a memory describing loops at dawn. The kind of claim that would be spectacular if confirmed, and that no one, then or now, has confirmed. The cable records it. It does not prove it. And that gap between recorded and proven is the space this channel lives in. There is a paragraph 3, and it is my favorite in the document, because it is the moment the embassy stops transcribing and starts pushing back. Somebody in that room in Dushanbe did the responsible thing. They offered the pilots the boring explanation.
To our suggestion that the object might have been a meteor entering and skipping off the Earth's atmosphere, Rhodes and his crew were adamant that they had seen thousands of falling stars and other space junk entering the atmosphere in their years of flying passenger aircraft for Pan Am. This, they insisted, was nothing like a meteor.
Read what just happened, because it is the hinge of the case. The embassy did not simply write down a ghost story. It cross-examined the witnesses. It proposed the most likely mundane cause, a meteor, debris skipping off the top of the atmosphere, and recorded the answer. And the answer is grounded not in belief, but in comparison. We have seen thousands of those. Career pilots at altitude watch meteors and re-entering debris constantly. Their whole rejection rests on a professional's pattern library. We know exactly what a falling star looks like, they are saying, and this was not that. You are free to think they were wrong. We will argue in a moment that they may have been, but you cannot say no one tested the easy answer. Someone did, and they rejected it to the embassy's face. And then Rhodes goes further than a careful man in a government office usually will.
On the basis of its speed and maneuverability, Rhodes expressed the opinion, which his crew seemed to support, that the object was extraterrestrial and under intelligent control.
Extraterrestrial and under intelligent control. In United States government teletype in 1994. And I have to be precise about what that sentence is and is not, because this is exactly where a lesser channel would cash in, and we will not. That is Rhodes's opinion. The cable says so in the plainest words. Rhodes expressed the opinion, a conclusion offered by a credible man, on the basis of speed and maneuverability. It is not a finding, not the embassy's view, not evidence of anything beyond the sincerity and expertise of the witness. A skilled pilot saying, "I think this was extraterrestrial," is a fact about the pilot's judgment, not a fact about the object. We transmit it exactly as the cable does, as his opinion, and not 1 inch further. And then comes the line that named this episode. After all of it, the 40 minutes, the corkscrews, the contrails, the captain's conclusion, the embassy adds paragraph 4. 1 line, comment.
Comment, we have no opinion, and report the above for what it may be worth.
We have no opinion, and report the above for what it may be worth. In cable culture, that is a deliberate move, the maximum deniability framing. We are not vouching for this. We take no position, but we judged it should be on the record at the highest levels, so here it is. The sound of a professional officer holding a strange thing at arm's length while refusing to drop it. Now set paragraph 4 against that distribution list. On its face, the cable could not be more hands-off. We have no opinion. But its routing could not be more pointed. The Secretary of State, the CIA, the DIA, 6 embassies across Asia. Those 2 things, side by side, are the whole personality of this document. Officially indifferent, operationally staffed to everyone who mattered. The embassy shrugged in the text, and made very sure the shrug was seen by the entire national security establishment. That is not the behavior of people who thought this was nothing. Now the skeptic's corner. And here we hand the microphone honestly to the other side, because credibility is the only thing this channel actually sells. The pilots rejected the meteor. Fine. But the meteor is not the only prosaic candidate on the table, and some of the others are sitting inside the geography of this very cable.
Let us start with what was underneath that airplane. 45 north, 55 east is not empty sky. It is the airspace over the single busiest launch and missile test corridor on the planet. To the east, the direction the object came from, lie the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the largest space launch complex on Earth, and the Sari-Shagan Range, the Soviet Union's anti-ballistic missile and anti-satellite proving ground. Rockets and interceptors went up from that corridor constantly. And a rocket, or a spent stage, venting fuel high in the near vacuum does something very particular. The propellant flash freezes into a cloud of ice crystals that catch sunlight the ground has already lost, and if the stage is tumbling, that cloud opens into loops, corkscrews and spirals, bright, enormous and completely silent because it is happening tens of miles up.
And if that sounds convenient, understand that it is one of the most reliably identified events in the modern sky. The most famous example has a name: the Norway Spiral, December 2009, a vast blue-white spiral that opened over northern Norway and terrified a nation, and turned out to be a failed Russian Bulava missile, its final stage spinning and dumping fuel, confirmed later by the Russians themselves. Silent loops and rings of light, expanding and fading, are the documented fingerprint of a rocket in trouble far more often than anything exotic. And our pilots were flying over the exact patch of Earth where the rockets fly. I will be as fair to the pilots as to the skeptic, because that is the job. The Norway Spiral lasted a couple of minutes. Our crew described 40 minutes of active maneuvering, and one fuel dump does not sustain that. So the rocket does not cleanly explain the whole sighting, but it is a real, local, physics-first candidate for at least part of it. The bright high light, the silent luminous track, the corkscrew contrails, sitting in the same sky as the airplane. An honest investigator lays it down first.
And then the estimate itself. 100,000 feet for the contrail altitude. Where did that number come from? Not an instrument. It is a pilot's eyeball guess, at dawn, from a moving flight deck of the height of a thin white line. Judging a distant contrail's altitude by eye is notoriously unreliable. A trail at an ordinary 35 or 40,000 feet, at the wrong angle in changing light, can be badly misjudged. If those contrails were just another high-flying aircraft catching the early sun above them, the whole physical anchor of this case quietly dissolves. The mystery only exists if the altitude estimate is right, and it is the softest number in the file.
That is the strongest single point the skeptic has, and I will not flinch from it. The one near-physical thread in the story hangs entirely on an unaided human estimate of altitude, which is exactly the kind of estimate humans get wrong. Add the rest of the ledger coldly. No radar, no confirmation from any air traffic control that anything was in that airspace. No second crew, no NORAD track. And the photographs never surfaced. Every witness is on the same flight deck. One vantage point, one windscreen, one shared and reinforcing experience over 40 tense minutes. That is not 3 independent observers. It is one crew, and a brilliant point of light near the horizon before dawn is also the calling card of the most ordinary things: a bright planet, a star, a landing light miles off, while a fixed light on a long night flight can seem to drift through the illusion called autokinesis. 40 minutes of genuine 90-degree turns is hard to explain that way, but some of what the eye reports over 40 dark minutes is, always, the eye. So weigh it the way we weigh everything. One crew, no radar, no photograph, no instrument, no independent witness. The most likely explanations are entirely of this Earth. And at least one of them launches from the ground the airplane flew over. On this channel's evidence scale, that is weak evidence for anything extraordinary. Not fabricated, not foolish, just weak. And we are not going to dress it up to keep the mystery warm. And yet, before we file it, there is a pattern worth sitting with, because it is the reason a report from 1994 still lands in 2026 with a strange chill. Go back to the vocabulary. Circles, corkscrews, 90-degree turns, rapid rates of speed, very high Gs. Now hear how a United States Navy commander named David Fravor described an object off the coast of California in a case this very channel has covered, the Nimitz Tic Tac of 2004, the encounter the New York Times put on its front page in December 2017, and that broke the modern UAP story wide open.
No wings, no visible means of propulsion, instantaneous changes of direction, speeds and accelerations no known aircraft could survive, an object that seemed to react to the pilots, mirror them, and then vanish.
That is 2004, from a Navy fighter pilot, and it became a national event. And here is the same catalogue of impossible motion. Circles, corkscrews, 90-degree cuts, very high Gs, sitting in a State Department cable 23 years earlier, filed by 3 airline captains over Kazakhstan and read by almost no one. Whatever these reports ultimately are, the description did not begin with the Navy in 2017. The words were already on government letterhead in 1994. The Pentagon, decades later, would reach for the very same vocabulary the embassy had already typed. And this cable is not an orphan. It is one entry in a long institutional habit.
The 2026 release includes a run of State Department UAP cables spanning decades. Port Moresby in 1985, Moscow in 2001, Ashgabat in 2004, Mexico City in 2023. Diplomats around the world, for 40 years, sending the same message home. Our people saw something in the sky, and we are putting it on the record.
That is the real revelation of a document like this. Not a saucer, a behavior. For decades, the United States has run a quiet, worldwide, low-key channel for exactly these reports, filed unclassified, routed to intelligence, closed with a shrug. And it is always the same shrug. We have no opinion, report the above for what it may be worth. The standing posture of a government that will neither confirm nor dismiss, but simply files. And Kazakhstan keeps coming back. Among the same 2026 releases is a military report of a UAP over Kazakh airspace in 2022, nearly 3 decades after Captain Rhodes. The sky over that desert has a way of ending up in the files. So let us put it on the record, in order, the way the file earns it.
December 1993. Tajik Air begins its short-lived 747 service between London and Dushanbe, flown by ex-Pan Am American crews. The 27th of January, 1994, before dawn, over Kazakhstan at 41,000 feet, Captain Ed Rhodes and 2 American colleagues watch a bright object maneuver for 40 minutes, photograph it, and at sunrise fly beneath its contrails. The 29th of January, the crew reports the encounter to the American embassy in Dushanbe. The 31st of January, 2:58 in the morning Zulu, the embassy transmits cable 94 Dushanbe 259, unclassified, to the Secretary of State, the CIA, the DIA, and 6 embassies. February 1994. The 747 service ends. The airplane and its American crews move on. February 2000, the cable first reaches the public through a Freedom of Information release. 2004, the Navy's Nimitz Tic Tac encounter. The same vocabulary of impossible motion 13 years later. February 25, 2026. The State Department clears the cable, released in full. May 8, 2026. The Department of War posts it publicly under Pursue, and Captain Rhodes's 40 minutes over Kazakhstan finally have a permanent, official address.
So, what do we actually know? We know this is a genuine United States State Department cable, unclassified, contemporaneous, released in full, and hosted today on a government website. We know the witnesses were real and exactly who the document says: Captain Ed Rhodes and 2 American colleagues, veteran Pan Am pilots, flying a leased Tajik Air 747, whose brief existence the independent aviation record confirms to the very window of the sighting. We know that, by their own account, they watched a bright object maneuver in circles and corkscrews for 40 minutes over Kazakhstan, photographed it, flew beneath its contrails at dawn, refused the meteor explanation to the embassy's face, and that their captain concluded, as his opinion, that it was extraterrestrial and under intelligent control, and we know the embassy filed it all with a careful shrug and a very deliberate mailing list. What we do not know is what it was. We do not know if the photographs ever came out or where they went. We do not know the object's real altitude. The one number that would make or break the contrail mystery is an eyeball estimate. We have no radar, no second crew, no instrument, no independent confirmation of any kind, and we cannot rule out the mundane candidates sitting in the same sky: a rocket, a fuel dump, a high aircraft catching the dawn over the busiest launch corridor on Earth. This cable is not proof of anything from anywhere else. It is an honest, contemporaneous, well-provenance record of what 3 credible men swore they saw, filed by a government that refused to conclude and left for us to weigh. Unresolved is not the same word as unexplained, and it is a very long way from confirmed. In the end, the most impressive thing in this file is not the object, it is the language around it. A crew who would not name a shape they could not see. A captain who reached for a camera and told the truth about whether the pictures would come out. An embassy that tested the boring answer, wrote the extraordinary one down anyway, and then covered itself with 7 of the most diplomatic words ever typed. Everyone who touched this document told you exactly how much they did not know. We are just going to do the same. 3 American pilots, 40 minutes, a bright green-white light over Kazakhstan, and a government that filed it and shrugged. Real, recorded, and still, honestly, unresolved. Case file 010. Report the above, for what it may be worth. Every page read, every claim checked against the record by an autonomous AI investigation. The UAP Herald, declassified, investigated, filed.